The case seeking legal recognition of Muslim marriages continues in the Western Cape High Court. The Women's Legal Centre is taking government to task for failing to put legislation in place to protect Muslim women. Females represented by the organisation say when faced with a divorce, they are left vulnerable and penniless. To discuss this further, we are now joined by Shaykh Ihsaan Talip from the Muslim Judicial Council. Shaykh, thank you very much for being with us and welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
It's an absolute pleasure. Now, let's get to I suppose, the first logical question. What does the Quran say as far as divorce is concerned?
Well, Leanne, divorce is a normal process within the context of marriage. Of course, it's not what we look forward to when a couple embark upon the very sacred institution of marriage, but it is part of life. It is the reality of life. And so from the Quranic perspective, most definitely when there is cause for the dissolution of marriage, which steps in or that arise between the couple, then most certainly divorce is certainly a natural sort of process that is available for a couple to choose and to opt for.
There was a Muslim woman who was quoted as saying that the Quran says divorce should be on equitable terms, meaning that it must be fair, just and equal. If that is the case, why are there so many women saying that when facing a divorce, they are left with absolutely nothing?
Leanne, I think it is important for us as society to understand that, whilst there are laws in place, and in this instance, we also have laws which are basically located within a theological and within a faith framework. The fact of the matter is that when people live their lives and when people, especially when there is a context of conflict and parties are now coming to a point where the marriage is no longer a tolerable sort of option and sort of alternative for them, that they do not necessarily consider what their moral and their ethical, dictates of their faith require of them. And that people become then very selfish, people become very belligerent within these kinds of contexts. And so, like, human beings are inclined to, they would become very, very selfish in terms of what they try to achieve.
Yeah. I imagine the court case is long overdue for the Muslim community. But what has organizations such as the Muslim Judicial Council done in this regard?
Well, the issue pertaining to the protection of especially those who are more vulnerable within the situation, and in most cases of the situation of women, the MJC and the informal judiciaries across the country, they have services available to the community in terms of mediation, in terms of counseling, etc. The fact of the matter is that when the parties come to the conclusion that the marriage is over, the marriage is done, and they want out, then obviously a divorce proceedings will be undertaken. The divorce proceedings will have consequences, and those consequences inevitably are the areas where in the informal judiciary bodies like the MJC then come to a point of really obstacle and challenge, because these informal judiciary bodies do not exercise any executive authority, and they don't enjoy authority to implement or to enforce any award or any finding that they may come to.
Yeah. If the Women's Legal Centre wins this particular case and Muslim marriages are recognised, how will the judgment actually affect Muslim law?
Well, the judgment per se in this case, for us, the Muslim Judicial Council as well as the United Ulama Council of South Africa basically are amicus curiae in this particular case as friends of the court, in the sense that the long outstanding and really protracted process of attempting to get legislation, a legislative framework for Muslim personal law within a South African context is one which we hope would be served in this particular instance. The main relief that is being sought, obviously, in this particular case is for government and the legislature in particular to step forward and to step up to the plate in order to bring about legislation that will regulate and that will also serve as a framework for regulating the outcomes and the consequences of marriage and divorce, etc.
Yeah. I mean, since Muslim marriages are not legal, how else are Muslim women left vulnerable due to this?
Well, the issues that obviously come about more particularly are when there is conflict, when there is, tension and when there is lack of agreement and consensus. We find that women in many instances are left to the devices of men who are unethical in terms of their way in which a divorce proceeding is undertaken. Sometimes women are left, defenseless in terms of their maintenance, in terms of inheritance laws, also when there are, for example, cases of death, etc. There's also the issue of them having lived in a family home for a very, very long period of time, then finding no recourse in terms of being put out of a home. There are many instances of this regard. I think, Leanne, it is instructive that we find so many cases, in fact, as we speak, that do come to our South African courts, that do have to be, that do have to be kind of regulated and also being brought to a conclusion. And these conclusions are developing as case law, they are developing as precedents, and at the same time, obviously, the only thing that our judges have recourse to is to the existing pieces of legislation, like the South African Marriages Act, like the divorce laws in our country, and the piecemeal development of case law in this context is quite problematic.
Yeah, I mean, this has been something that's been ongoing for a while, and one would hope that this actually brings about some form of justice now. But just in terms, and finally, of South African law, because I mean, there's if you live with somebody for a while, if you are married to somebody for X amount of times, or you're living together, it's almost like a common property kind of law. How does this differ from that kind of law, the South African law, as opposed to what the Muslim or Islam dictates?
Yeah, of course, Leanne, we have very specific, the laws from the Islamic perspective, we have its base being in the Quran and in the Sharia of Islam. Like we have also in our country today, we have Traditional Marriages Act, in fact, we even have the Civil Unions Bill. And so there are many different peculiarities and specificities that would apply in each case. So what we are saying is that when we have Muslim marriages being recognized, we would obviously then also require that the outcomes and the consequences to these marriage rights and marriage sacraments all be recognized as a full package. So all we would like to see in place is to have a regulatory framework, is to have the bulk of the laws of Muslim marriages being adjudicated and actually being implemented in our judicial system for people to have redress in accordance with that system of law. Okay.
All right, we leave it there for this morning. Thank you very, very much for talking to us on the program. Shaykh Ihsaan Talip from the Muslim Judicial Council. It is 7 o'clock. Let's get your main news bulletin.